Hey, everybody. Few tech, cloud, SaaS-ish startups have captivated us more over the last 5 to 6 years than Snowflake. Snowflake. Before the explosion of NVIDIA and Gen AI, it seemed like all we were talking about. It rocketed to IPO, rocketed to $1 billion in ARR, $2 billion and $3 billion. We all became, or most of us became acolytes of Frank Slootman, who recently stepped down as CEO. But now, for the first time ever, at 3.1 billion in AR, Snowflake, still a rocket ship, still epic, but signs of actually being human, For the first time, growth has slowed to a mere mortal number, to just over 32% at 3.1 billion. Now, that's still incredible. That still means Snowflake is adding 1 billion of new bookings a year. It's jaw-dropping, but it has finally hit some headwinds. Would I bet against Snowflake? Absolutely not. As we'll see in a minute when we get into 5 plus, really 6 interesting learnings, a new customer count is still growing over 20% a year. That is jaw-dropping. Most of us see our new customer count start to decline as we approach 100 million, 200 million of AR. It just gets harder and harder to find new customers, but not Snowflake. Snowflake is still bringing in, it's vacuuming in new customers. So even if times are a little bit tougher this year, I'm pretty darn bullish about the next 5 to 7 years. But for the first time ever, Snowflake looks human. So let's talk about 5 plus interesting learnings about Snowflake at 3.1 billion in revenue. So the biggest issue that Snowflake has, and I put issue in quotes, this is still one for the ages. Everyone should aspire to be even a fraction as successful as Snowflake. But where they've been hit hardest is NRR. And NRR is at 131% today, which is incredible. Most of us would be thrilled to get anything close to 131% NRR. But for years and quarter after quarter, it remained at insane rates, at rates of 160, 170%. And that just fueled incredible growth. If your NRR is 170%, you add 20 to 30% new customers a year. I mean, you can approach 200% growth. It was pretty incredible. Snowflake had growth like we've never seen. But the story of the last year has been to manage workloads, to manage spend, and Snowflake is not immune. It has not seen any massive change in logo churn, but customers are being more careful about the data they put in the cloud, about managing spend, and Snowflake has not been immune to that. NRR remains world-class, but dropping from 170% to 131% in about 6 quarters has definitely put a dent in growth. Number 2, Snowflake has done what almost every other cloud leader has done who's seen growth slowed, is gotten even more efficient. So they still remain not just even at the rule of 40 in terms of operating margins plus growth. They're north of the rule of 50 even today. So even as growth slowed a bit, they have pushed free cash flow to 29%. For every dollar Snowflake charges, basically 29 cents comes in as free cash flow, as new cash. That's pretty impressive. It was very impressive at 25% a year ago. 2 years ago, when no one seemed to care, it was still pretty insanely efficient with 12% adjusted free cash flow. But at 29%, Snowflake is on the way to jaw-dropping efficiency. So it has reacted in the same way that almost every other public cloud and SaaS leader has, which is getting even more efficient. And we'll talk about how in just a second. Adding headcount. Now, this is an interesting chart. We talked through something very differently with Iran from Monday at SaaStr Annual this year. How is Snowflake getting more efficient? Well, there's 2 pieces, but the main one is, it's not that it's shrinking headcount. It is adding headcount, but more slowly than revenue. This is a story with many cloud leaders. Revenue is up 32% right now, but headcount is up only 19%. They're still adding employees. In fact, they added almost 1,200 employees the last year, but that's at a much slower growth rate. In fact, about half the growth rate of revenue. That's how you get more efficient. It's not layoffs. A lot of folks have been through layoffs, but layoffs, frankly, are a radical solution to tougher times. They are radical. You don't usually need to go through layoffs if the business is going well. You may need to do one shock layoff. I mean, hopefully you never have to. You should be able to predict. But maybe there's a rationale for doing one shock layoff. But after that, leaders should be able to just manage hiring, manage headcount. It's not perfect. You may take a hit in innovation later, but most leaders are writing this playbook today. They're quietly hiring again. They're hiring just slower than revenue is growing. Point number 4 with Snowflake, and this is again a phenomenon we see with so many leaders in cloud and SaaS. SMBs are in some cases struggling. They're smaller tech customers. If you had to do a 2x2 of SMB, enterprise, and tech, non-tech, it's tech SMBs that are struggling the most. They were They were the rocket ships in 2021, the unicorns that would seem to buy anything. But today, the unicorns are, 70% of them are struggling. So the tech SMBs, so to speak, are struggling, but the enterprise customers are benefiting from the huge boom in dollars still being put into cloud. And we're seeing that at Snowflake as well as Elastic and HashiCorp and others. So net, their $1 million plus customers are growing 39% a year. We see this again and again. Now, look, this varies. We did a great deep dive with Henry Shook from ZoomInfo recently, and he made the point, look, right now, these sort of tech companies are struggling the most, and our non-tech and bigger customers are our strongest quadrant of customers. But that changes. He says that rotates in and out. I've been doing that for a while. And if you ignore tech, if you ignore your smaller customers, if you ignore your long tail, you may regret it when the pendulum swings back and forth during different cycles. But right now it has swung clearly in favor of bigger buyers for the leader in cloud and SaaS, and Snowflake is not alone. They've got $461 million customers, and that $1 million customer group is growing 39% a year. Point 5, I was pretty impressed by this. Maybe you wouldn't be, but they've got at over $3 billion in ARR, they still have an NPS of 67. And why does that impress me? Well, a few years ago, it wouldn't have impressed me. I would have thought, actually, we do love our leaders, and our leaders build more and more software, and we rely on them. We buy more from them. I would expect high NPS to last. But the last 18 months, I've seen so much rough behavior from account management, from upsell, from threatening customers at renewals, that I would have expected in many cases NPS to go down. Not necessarily at Snowflake, but at many others, as just the incredible pressure to monetize the base comes when new growth is harder to get. But not at Snowflake. 67. Now, look, I know some of you will say NPS is not a GAAP metric. It can be gamed. It can be gamed based on who you send it to, how you segment it, how you tweak the questions. All true. All true. But I think if you measure it consistently over time and you ask the same questions and you send it to the same folks, I still think it's very useful. And I think an NPS of this level of 67 is incredibly telling that you're doing almost all things right by your customers. And this last point, and I think if things are at all tougher for you or for anyone, this is the most important metric. Revenue growth ultimately is what matters, and actually ultimately profits matter, I guess, at scale more than revenue growth at some level, arguably. But your future is your new customer count. And so many folks struggle as they scale to add new customers. And I see, as folks hit 50 million in ARR, 100 million or beyond, I see their new customer count drop into the teens. And to me, that's a flag. If your new customer count falls below half of your overall revenue growth, or if your new customer count drops into the teens or lower, the future looks tough. The future looks tough when your new customer count is growing 10%, even if your NRR is so high or other things are going well that then you can monetize the base for now. You need the future. And frankly, it just gets hard. It gets hard as a Ron from Monday, his great SaaS annual presentation, when he's like, at some point, everyone in the world is using Monday. Well, the good news for Snowflake is everyone in the world isn't actually using Snowflake yet, as amazing as that sounds, because their new customer count is still growing 22%. This bodes incredibly well, and they're coming up on just 10,000 customers. 10,000 customers is a lot, but it is kind of a milestone to check in for ubiquity. Many folks see growth slow around 10,000 customers. We've written this data up on SaaStr, but Snowflake is still growing at 22%. There's another 10,000, another 20, another 30,000 out there for Snowflake. And this is why I don't think anyone would ever bet against Snowflake, but I certainly wouldn't take a slightly more challenging year and bet against this company with 22% new customer growth at 3.1 billion AR. Also, take it as a challenge. Take it as a challenge that the best companies find ways to keep growing their TAM, to keep adding more value to their customers, to keep expanding that number. If Snowflake can grow its new customer base 22% at 3 billion in ARR, I think you could do even better at 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million in revenue. So anyhow, incredible story. Some tougher times for Snowflake, some tougher times for many of us, but I'm pretty bullish on the fact that NRR will bounce back. Add to that 22% growth in new customers, and I predict another 5 to 7 great years for Snowflake. We'll see. We'll check in then.